Good evening. I am Akshay from Standard 10 Ramakrishna Academy, and on the account of APJ Abdul Kalam's birth anniversary, which is also known as Vachan Prerna Din, I would like to read a section from the book Wings of Fire, which is the autobiography of Abdul Kalam, which is written by him with the help of Mr. Arun Tiwari. So I am reading the part 1 of chapter 1, Orientation, which is the part of his life from 1931 to 1963. I was born into a middle-class Tamil family in the island town of Rameswaram in the erstwhile Madras state. My father, Jainul Abdin, had neither much formal education nor much wealth. Despite these disadvantages, he possessed great innate wisdom and a true generosity of spirit. He had an ideal helpmate in my mother, Ashiyamma. I do not recall the exact number of people she fed every day, but I am quite certain that far more outsiders ate with us than all the members of our family put together. My parents were widely regarded as an ideal couple. My mother's lineage was more distinguished, one of her forebears having been bestowed the title of Bahadur by the British. I was one of many children, a short boy with rather undistinguished looks, born to tall and handsome parents. We lived in an ancestral house, which was built in the middle of 19th century. It was a fairly large pakka house made of limestone and bricks on the Mosque Street in Rameswaram. My father used to avoid all inessential comforts and luxuries. However, all necessaries were provided for in terms of food, medicine or clothes. In fact, I would say mine was a very secure childhood, both materially and emotionally. I normally ate with my mother, sitting on the floor of the kitchen. She would place a banana leaf before me, on which she had ladled rice and aromatic sambar, a variety of sharp, homemade pickles, and a dollop of fresh coconut chutney. The famous Shiva temple, which made Rameswaram so sacred to pilgrims, was about a 10-minute walk from our house. Our locality was predominantly Muslim, but there were quite a few Hindu families too, living amicably with their Muslim neighbors. There was also a very old mosque in our locality where my father would take me to evening prayers. I had not the faintest idea of the meaning of the Arabic prayers chanted, but I was totally convinced that they reached God. When my father came out of the mosque after the prayers, people of different religion would be sitting outside waiting for him. Many of them offered bowls of water to my father, who would dip his fingertips in them and say a prayer. This water was carried home for invalids. I also remember people visiting our home to offer thanks after being cured. My father always smiled and asked them to thank Allah, the benevolent and merciful. The high priest of Rameswaram temple, Pakshi Lakshman Shastri, he was a very close friend of my father's. One of the most vivid memories of my early childhood is of the two men, each in his traditional attire, discussing spiritual matters. When I was old enough to ask questions, I asked my father about the relevance of prayer. My father told me there was nothing mysterious about prayer. Rather, prayer made possible a communication of the spirit between people. When you pray, he said, you transcend your body and become a part of the cosmos, which knows no division of wealth, age, caste or creed. My father could convey complex spiritual concepts in very simple, down-to-earth Tamil. He once told me, in his own time, in his own place, in what he really is, and in the stage he has reached, good or bad, every human being is a specific element within the whole of the manifest divine being. So why be afraid of difficulties, sufferings, and problems? When troubles come, try to understand the relevance of your sufferings. Adversity always presents opportunities for introspection. Why don't you say this to the people who come to you for help and advice? I asked my father. He put his hands on my shoulder and looked straight into my eyes. For quite some time, he said nothing, as if he was judging my capacity to comprehend his words. Then he answered in a low, deep voice. His answer filled me with a strange energy and enthusiasm. Whenever human beings find themselves alone, as a natural reaction, they start looking for company. Whenever they are in trouble, they look for someone to help them. Whenever they reach an impasse, they look for someone to show them the way out. every recurrent anguish, longing, and desire finds its own special helper. For the people who come to me in distress, I am but a go between in the efforts to propitiate demonic forces with prayers and offerings. This is not the correct approach to at all and should never be followed. One must understand the difference between a fear-ridden vision of destiny and a vision that enables us to seek the enemy of fulfillment within ourselves. I remember my father starting his day at 4 a.m. by reading the namaz before dawn. After namaz, he used to walk down to a small coconut grove we owned, about 4 miles from our home. He would return with about a dozen of coconuts tied together, thrown over his shoulder, and only then would he have his breakfast. This remained his routine even when he was in his late 60s. I have throughout my life tried to emulate my father in my own world of science and technology. I have endeavored to understand the fundamental truth revealed to me by my father and feel convinced that there exists a divine power that can lift one up from confusion, misery, melancholy, and failure and guide one to one's true place. And once an individual severs his emotional and physical bondage, he is on the road to freedom, happiness, and peace of mind. I was about 6 years old when my father embarked on the project of building a wooden sailboat to take pilgrims from Rameshwaram to Dhanushakoti and back. He worked at building the boat on the seashore with the help of a relative, Ahmad Jalaluddin, who later married my sister Zohara. I watched the boat take shape. The wooden hull and the bulkheads were seasoned with the heat from wood fires. My father was doing good business with the boat when one day a cyclone bringing winds of over 100 miles per hour carried our boat away, along with some landmass of Setukarai. The Pamban bridge collapsed with the train of full passengers on it. Until then, I had only seen the beauty of the sea. Now its uncontrollable energy came as a revelation for me. By the time the boat met its end, Ahmad Jalaluddin became a close friend of mine, despite the difference in our ages. He was 15 years old, and used to call me Azad. We used to go for long walks together every evening. As we started from Mosque Street and made our way towards the sandy shores of the island, Jalaluddin and I talked mainly of spiritual matters. The atmosphere of Rameshwaram, with its flocking pilgrims, was conducive to such discussion. Our first halt would be at the imposing temple of Lord Shiva, circling around the temple with the same reverence as any pilgrim from a distant part of the country. We felt a flow of energy passing through us. Jalaluddin would talk about God as if he had a working partnership with him. He would present all his doubts to God as if he was standing nearby to dispose of them. I would stare at Jalaluddin and then look towards the large group of pilgrims around the temple, taking holy dips in the sea, performing rituals and reciting prayers with a sense of respect towards the same unknown, whom we treat as the formless Almighty. I never doubt that the prayers in the temple reach the same destination as ones offered in our mosque. I only wonder whether Jalaluddin had any other special connection to God. Jalaluddin's schooling had been limited, principally because of his family's strained circumstances. This may have been the reason why he always encouraged me to excel in my studies and enjoyed my success in a very beautiful way. Never did I find the slightest trace of resentment in Jalaluddin for his deprivation. Rather, he was always full of gratitude for whatever life had chosen to give him. Incidentally, at the time I speak of, he was the only person on the entire island who could write English. He wrote letters for almost anybody in need, but they letters of application or otherwise. Nobody of my acquaintance, either in my family or in my neighborhood, even Jalaluddin's level of education or any links of consequence with the outside world. Jalaluddin always spoke to me about educated people, of scientific discoveries, of contemporary literature, and of the achievements of medical science. It was he who made me aware of a brave new world beyond our narrow confines. In the humble environs of my boyhood, books were a scarce commodity by local standards. However, the personal library of S.T.R. Manicum, a former revolutionary or militant nationalist, was sizable. He encouraged me to read all I could, and I often visited his home to borrow books. Another person who greatly influenced my boyhood was my first cousin, Samsuddin. He was the sole distributor for newspapers in Rameshwaram. The newspapers would arrive at Rameshwaram station by the morning train from Pamban. Samsuddin's newspaper agency was one-man organization catering to the reading demands of the 1,000 strong literate population of Rameshwaram town. These newspapers were mainly brought to keep abreast of current developmentals in the national independence movement, for astrological references, or to check the bullion rates prevailing in Madras. A few readers with a more cosmopolitan outlook would discuss Hitler, Mahatma Gandhi, and Jinnah. Almost all would finally flow in the mighty political current of Periyar E.V. Ramaswamy's movement against high caste Hindus. Dinamani was the most sought after paper. Since reading the printed matter was beyond my capability, I had to satisfy myself with glancing at the pictures in the newspaper before Samshuddin delivered them to his customers. The Second World War broke out in 1937, when I was 8 years old. For reasons I have never been able to understand, a sudden demand for tamarind seeds erupted in the market. I used to collect seeds and sell them to a provision shop on Mosque Street. A day's collection would fetch me the princely sum of one anna. Jalaluddin would tell me stories about the war, which I would later attempt to trace in the headlines of Dinamani. Our island, being isolated, was completely unaffected by war. But soon, India was forced to join the Allied forces, and something like a state of emergency was declared. The first casualty came in the form of suspension of the train halt in the Rameshwaram station. The newspapers now had to be bundled and thrown away from the moving train onto Rameshwaram road between Rameshwaram and Dhanushakoti. That forced Samshuddin to look for a helping hand to catch the bundles, and as if naturally I filled the slot. Samshuddin helped me earn my first wakes. Half a century later, I can still feel the same surge of pride in earning my own money for the first time. Every child is born with some inherited characteristics into a specific socio-economic and emotional environment, and trained in certain ways by figures of authority. I inherited honesty and self-discipline from my father, from my mother. I inherited faith in goodness and deep kindness, and so did my three brothers and sister. But it was the time I spent with Jalaluddin and Samshuddin that perhaps contributed most to the uniqueness of my childhood and made all the difference in my later life. The unschooled wisdom of Jalaluddin and Samshuddin was so intuitive and responsive to my non-verbal messages that I can unhesitatingly attribute my subsequently manifested creativity to their company in my childhood. I had three close friends in my childhood: Ramanatha Shastri, Aravindan, and Shiva Prakashan. All these boys were from orthodox Hindu Brahmin families. As children, none of us ever felt any difference amongst ourselves because of our religious differences and upbringing. In fact, Shastri was the son of Pakshi Lakshman Shastri, the high priest of Rameshwaram temple. Later, he took over the priesthood of Rameshwaram temple from his father. Arvindan went into the business of arranging transport for visiting pilgrims, and Shiva Prakashan became a catering contractor for the Southern Railways. During the annual Shri Sitaram Kalyanam ceremony, our family used to arrange boats with a special platform for carrying the idols of the Lord from the temple to the marriage site, situated in the middle of the pond called Ramatirtha, which was near our house. Events from Ramayana and from the life of the prophet were the bedtime stories of my mother and grandmother would tell me the children in our family. One day, I was in the 5th standard in the Rameshwaram Elementary School. A new teacher came to our class. I used to wear a cap which marked me as a Muslim, and I always sat in the front row next to Ramanand Shastri, who wore a sacred thread. The new teacher could not stomach priest, a Hindu priest's son sitting with a Muslim boy. In accordance with the social ranking as the new teacher saw it, I was asked to go and sit on the back bench. I felt very sad, and so did Shastri. He looked utterly downcast as I shifted to my seat in the last row. The image of him weeping when I shifted to the last row left a lasting impression on me. After school, we went home and told our respective parents about the incident. Lakshman Shastri summoned the teacher and, in our presence, told the teacher that he should not spread the poison of social inequality and communal intolerance in the minds of innocent children. He bluntly asked the teacher to either apologize or quit the school and the island. Not only did the teacher regret his behavior, but the strong sense of conviction Lakshman Shastri conveyed ultimately reformed this young teacher. On the whole, the small society of Rameshwaram was highly satisfied with very rigid in terms of segregation of different social groups. However, my science teacher, Shiva Subramanya Iyer, though an orthodox Brahmin with a very conservative wife, was something of a rebel. He did his best to break social barriers so that people from varying backgrounds could mingle easily. He used to spend hours with me and would say, Kalam, I want you to develop so that you are on par with the highly educated people of the big cities. One day, he invited me to his home for a meal. His wife was horrified at the idea of a Muslim boy being invited to dine in her ritually pure kitchen. She refused to serve me in her kitchen. Shiva Subramanya Iyer was not perturbed, nor did he get angry with his wife, but instead served me with his own hands and sat down beside me to eat his meal. His wife watched us from behind the kitchen door. I wonder whether she had observed any difference in the way I ate rice, drank water, or cleaned the floor after meal. When I was leaving her house, Iyer invited me to join him for dinner again the next weekend. Observing my hesitation, he told me not to get upset, saying, once you decide to change the system, such problems have to be confronted. When I visited the house next week, Iyer's wife took me inside the kitchen and served me food with her own hands. Then the Second World War was over and India's freedom was imminent. Indians will build their own India, declared Gandhiji. The whole country was filled with an unprecedented optimism, and I asked my father's permission to leave Rameshwaram and study at the district headquarters in Ramanathapuram. He told me as if thinking aloud, Abdul, I know that you have to go away to grow. Does the seagull not fly across the sun alone and without a nest? You must forego your longing for the land of your memories to move into the dwelling of place of your greater desires. A love will not bind you, nor will a needs hold you. He quoted Khalil Gibran to my hesitant mother. Your children are not your children. They are sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. He took me and my three brothers to the mosque and recited the prayer Al-Fatiha from the Holy Quran. As he put me on the train at Rameshwaram station, he said, this island may be housing your body, but not your soul. Your soul dwells in the house of tomorrow, which none of us at Rameshwaram can visit, nor even in our dreams. May God bless you, my child. Samsuddin and Jalaluddin travelled with me to Ramanathapuram to enroll me in Squads High School and to arrange for my boarding there. Somehow I did not take to the new setting. The town of Ramanathapuram was a thriving town of some 50,000 people, but the coherence and harmony of Rameshwaram was absent. I missed my home and grabbed every opportunity to visit Rameshwaram. The pull of educational opportunities in Ramanathapuram was not strong enough to nullify the attraction of Poli, a South Indian sweet my mother made. In fact, she used to prepare 12 distinctly different varieties of it, bringing out the flavor of every single ingredient used in the best possible combinations. Despite my homesickness, I was determined to come to terms with the new environment because I knew my father had invested great hopes in my success. My father visualized me as a collector in the making, and I thought it was my duty to realize my father's dream. Although I was desperately missed, Although I desperately missed the familiarity, security, and comforts of Rameshwaram. Jalaluddin used to speak to me about the power of positive thinking, and I often recalled his words whenever I felt homesick or dejected. I tried hard to do as he said, which was to strive to control my thoughts and my mind, and through these to influence my destiny. Ironically, that destiny did not lead me back to Rameshwaram, but rather swept me farther and farther from the home of my childhood. Thank you very much.